I hope you all enjoyed watching the film. I know that it's always inspiring to watch it and hear CCA's story, to see so many amazing folks in one place. And what a cool thing to have our story featured. I was just thinking about the piece of it where they talk about Pope Francis in Laudato Si, this idea that we're all connected, right? That wisdom of ecology. And that's something that I've seen over, that I've experienced in CCA, right? Is this sense of connection, that the sense that the ways in which we're interrelated matter. And the intergenerational aspects of CCA, I think, are a really cool thing, that there's this stream kind of, right? That, and this passing on of wisdom, and this sense that our stories and who we are as people and who we are in relationship to each other really matters. And I think that that's something that the hope is that we can lift up this evening, our own interrelationship, the ways that we're connected, and to take an opportunity to tell the stories that have made CCA what CCA is over the years. And with that in mind, we had this idea of gathering together some of the wisdom figures, some of the folks who have carried forth that vision of CCA and who have made this story and the continual telling of this story possible. So we have some folks on this call who are going to be part of a panel for us this evening, who are going to tell some of their stories, what CCA has meant in their own life, how they've been connected to CCA over the years, what their hopes are for the future of this movement as we move into the next 50 years. So these are the folks who have brought us to 50. So I'd just like to go around and let y'all know who we have here. And then we're going to kind of open it up for some conversation. So on our panel this evening is Sister Jane Omlor of the Tiffin Franciscan Sisters, Sister Beth Davies of the Congregation of Notre Dame, Joe Holland, Emeritus Professor of Philosophy and Religion at St. Thomas University, Les Schmidt, a regional worker with the Glenmary Home Missioners, Carol Warren, who's involved with the Environmental Justice Ministry at St. James Parish, Marie Cirillo, who's joining us on the phone, Federation of Communities in Service, FOCIS, Monica Appleby, also Federation of Communities in Service, and Sister Gretchen Shaffer, Sisters of St. Joseph and the Big Laurel Learning Center. So those folks will be going around in a moment, sharing a little bit about their story. I'm going to pose a question to them to launch the conversation. After we've gone around and heard from each of our panelists, we'd like to open it up to hear from you all. What questions do you want to ask our wisdom figures? What are the things you've always wondered about? What are the things that are on your mind? To share about and to share together in a conversation about the legacy of CCA. We're going to ask that you put those questions in the chat. Sarah explained how to use your chat feature. So just a quick reminder, if you move your cursor around or your mouse and you go to the bottom of your screen, your Zoom window, you'll see a function that says chat. It might be at the top of your screen if you're using a mobile device. You might need to click on the button that says more, or where you see 3 dots to find that chat. But if you'll go ahead and open that up, we'll use the chat function to communicate and to ask our questions when that time comes. Before we open it up, before I turn it over to our panelists, those of you who joined us for our liturgy might remember that we opened up our liturgy listening to a song, "This Land is Home to Me." That song, and the title of that song, written by Maureen Eaton, was used for the name of the first pastoral letter. So I feel like it's appropriate to begin by playing that song one more time. So I'd like us to take a moment to listen to that song and listen to the words of that song as we open up this conversation to reflect on what it has meant in the lives of our panelists to call this land home. So here we go.
This land is home to me. This land means more to me than all the races and the places in the world around. This land of mountains and valleys and streams, this land is home to me. But people come and go, they don't seem to show a sign of love for the little things the mountains bring. This land of mountains and valleys and streams, this land is home to me. People hear me, what I say. My children left this land today, but though they now are gone, their hearts still live on. In the mother's sighs, the family ties, the mountainsides. This land of mountains and valleys and streams, this land is home to me. This land is home to me. This land means more to me than all the races and the places in the world around. This land of mountains and valleys and streams, this land is home to me.
All right. So I'd like to turn it over at this time to our panelists to share a little bit of their wisdom and what CCA has meant in their own lives. I'm just going to go down the list as it appears in the schedule we send. So Sister Jane Omlor, if you'd like to go ahead and start us off, tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got involved with CCA, and what has the work of CCA meant for your life and ministry? Sister Jane, you're on mute, so I just asked you to unmute yourself.
Where are you?
There you go.
Okay, here we go. Yeah. Hi. I started by saying that song made me really homesick for the mountains. I've been a Sister of St. Francis for 58 years, and 27 of those years were spent in West Virginia, in Roane County and in Mingo County. I think it's pretty significant that my first introduction to Appalachia was in 1978. Somehow I got a hold of a very simple little newsletter that was all in green paper, and it was called the Green Revolution. And it was from the Catholic Worker Farm in Lincoln County, West Virginia. I don't know if Chuck Smith and Sandy Adams rings a bell, but they were the two guys that were at the Catholic Worker in Lincoln County, West Virginia. And there was a little ad in that newsletter that said that they were holding a workshop on edible weeds. I just wanted to get out of Tiffin, so I thought, oh, I think I'll go to West Virginia to that edible weeds workshop. So I scooped up my friend, Sister Paulette, who also wanted to get away from the mother house for a while. And we actually hitchhiked to Lincoln County, West Virginia, and ate weeds for about a week. And that's when I really felt called to come to Appalachia. When I got to that Catholic worker farm, I had to go over a swinging bridge way back in the holler. I just knew that that land was home to me. So that was my first introduction. Then I made one of Les Schmidt's workshops that they did for sisters, introducing mission possibilities in Appalachia. And that clinched the whole thing for me. So I finally found a place in 1980 down on Colt Run Holler in Roane County. And I joined Sister Jeannie McNulty for 17 years. We really lived a very simple life. We didn't have running water. I became very accustomed to an outhouse. We burned wood, so I became very accustomed to a chainsaw. During that 17 years, I started a preschool called the Pumpkin Patch. I began my career as a potter, mainly for self-support. And with a lot of help from a lot of people, I built my first straw bale building, which was a little straw bale chapel. In 1996, I moved to Mingo County and joined Sister Kathleen O'Hagan and Gretchen on Big Laurel Mountain and lived at the Knob. That's when I really became involved with the environment. We ministered to many young volunteers and mountain children and their families in a variety of ways. There was a busted up concrete slab in the backyard of the house called the Knob. And I'm sort of a dreamer, so I sort of envisioned an ecology center there. And it happened. People came from Tiffin, Ohio, brought his whole company and cleared out that concrete slab, built a beautiful concrete floor, and we began to build the Web of Life Ecology Center. And I had read the Pastoral at Home in the Web of Life, but I struggled to find the perfect name for this ecology center. I was coming up with all kinds of things, but it was a real effort. And one day I shared some of my ideas with Gretchen, and she just looked at me and she said, "Why don't you call it the Web of Life Ecology Center?" Brilliant, that's what we'll do. So we had the Web of Life Ecology Center became a reality. And we lived on a land trust, the Jasmine Land Trust. And surrounding the land trust, which was protected land, was lots of beautiful mountains. And that's where I experienced mountaintop removal mining. And I remember the coal company came to the house. They were trying to make sure they documented all the cracks that were in this house. Well, it was a stone house, so there were like thousands of cracks because they didn't want to be held liable for anything. So I remember where I was on that beautiful spring day when I heard the blasting, and it shook the earth. And I went in the house to get a drink of water, and no water came out of the faucet. Everybody on that ridge lost their well water that day because the blasting caved in the wells. So that was a rude awakening on the devastation of mountaintop removal mining. So for years, we had to pile our empty milk jugs in the truck and go down the mountain, which took about 45 minutes, to the 4-lane, Route 119, and fill it up with spring water on the side of the road, like many, many, many other mountain people. So that was difficult in the summer because we were doing summer camps, and we had volunteers, children, 25, 30 people up on the mountain, every camp. And we had no drinking water. So we had to go down at least every other day and get it. And we collected rainwater off the roof for washing and things like that. So I really believe I had a very firsthand experience with the struggles of the mountain people and mountaintop removal mining. But as I began to get older, my health started getting a little crazy from all the work. So I came back to Tiffin. Sometimes I wished I didn't. But in the span of the 8 years that I've been in Tiffin, I've had 2 knee replacements, back surgery, and 2 carpal tunnel surgery. So I feel like I've glued back together again. A couple of years after I got back to Tiffin, I got a very burning desire to stay involved in the struggle against mountaintop removal mining. So I love to build things. So I got with a bunch of folks around here, and we decided to build a straw bale house, a passive solar straw bale house that would be powered by the wind and the sun. Because you can talk all day long to people, but unless you can have something to show for it, they can come into the house, they can see it, is much more realistic and much more inspiring. So about 4 years it took us to collect the money, but we finally got a little portion green finished. So right now I'm living in a straw bale house with Sister Janet and our cat Pancake, and we give tours and educate folks on the need for renewable energy and green building. Over the years, about 7 now that I've been living here, over 1,000 people have come to the house. So I have a captive audience where I can really tell them about mountaintop removal mining, renewable energy, and I really get into it. I would say over 90% of the people that come to this house, mainly from Ohio, but also from other places, never heard of mountaintop removal mining. Never even heard of it. So I have a PowerPoint, and I really think I do a good job on educating them on what's happening, not too terribly far from Ohio. Recently, I've written a book about my life in West Virginia. It's called Clear Night, Bright Star. I talked to Jeannie Kirkhope, and she said that she would be glad to post it on the Appalachian Catholic Worker website, because I don't have a website. So if anybody's interested in that book, Clear Night, Bright Star, just go to Jeannie's website and she'll forward the information to me. So I really appreciate this time to share with you and to learn more and to be inspired. And the pastorals, This Land is Home to Me and Home in the Web of Life, have been very significant in my life. I remember all the pictures, and I go back to it on occasion and reflect on it. So thank you.
Right. So we've got, thanks so much, Sister Jane. We're going to turn it over to Sister Beth Davies now.
You just simply want me to tell you how I got into this area. Is that it? Is that the question?
Yeah. How'd you get involved with CCA, and what's it meant for your life? You know, how has Appalachia impacted your life?
Okay. I always say people ask me how I got to Appalachia, and I always say my students led me here. And the reason I say that is I was an administrator of a diocesan high school. And the person who was the assistant administrator, Ron Bianchi, had been at Fairfield University and had taken many students to the Appalachian region and immersed them in the area because he wanted them to see other parts of our country that they never came in touch with. And through him, for the students in the senior year, these were very bright kids, most of them, and they drove us crazy in the second half of their senior year. So we started a senior studies project. And one of the projects, they wrote it up themselves, they spent time with families in Appalachia through the Glenmary priests and Glenmary home missioners. And through that experience, I got to know a bit then through them about the Appalachian region. And then really, when I first was in the mountains, the first time I came here, I knew I was going to come back. There was a connection right away. And I think my connection comes from my roots. I come from Ireland and Scotland, all my family. And they always told me, even as a little child, I always wanted to be in the mountains, no matter where I was. It's a little tot. All I wanted to do was go to the mountains. So I know when I came here, and so that I came back, and Les Schmidt was very, very kind in the beginning to come and introduce himself, tell us about the place and so forth. And I came and landed up in where the little place I'm in now, St. Charles, which is a coal mining camp, which is practically not there anymore. It's almost like a ghost town. But anyway, so that was my experience there. And then through Les, I went to my first CCA meeting in 1972. And I believe we were in Knoxville, if I remember correctly. We were a handful of people. You know, you could count on, well, less than two hands, the number of people who were at that meeting. And that was my first introduction into the Catholic Committee of Appalachia. And of course, we know what's happened over the years. But that was really my introduction and the beginnings of the seed that began to grow into something that we know today. And that seed has really grown and is still growing.
Thanks, Sister Beth. I'm going to go a little out of order. I want to turn it over to Marie Cirillo just to make sure she is hearing us and still with us. And so we're going to turn it over to Marie next. Marie, are you there?
Yes, but I was thinking about how I could slip away because I'm worn out.
Oh no. Well, let's definitely hear your voice.
Yeah.
So
well, let's see.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what CCA has meant for your life? While you're talking, Sarah's going to give me a thumbs up just to make sure we can all hear you. So go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay. Certainly one of the first things I remember was who was going to take the leadership in kind of a thing like this. And I know some of us kept about Monica, and some people just knew it had to be a priest. So we tried to get a priest that could give other people some voice. I don't know, it was kind of, it's all behind me right now because things just ended up being so different. I hardly knew how, because the parish I lived in took a while to get there, and nobody there knew anything about Catholic Committee, and many of the priests could hardly speak English because we were a little kind of the least of the Catholic churches, I guess. So it's a sense of any real presence of a Catholic presence. I just feel like never quite got any place around here. And I don't know if the few other Catholics that are still here, because we went through that period when it was a mining area, and then there was no mining anymore. And then the companies that tried to get hold of the land, they were all big corporate people who wanted the forest. So I think the first thing some of us did was try to see if we couldn't get some local people, get some ownership, community groups, get hold of some of this land and see to it that we managed our forest lands. And I find myself still in that place right now. We're surrounded by forests, and I've come to understand that the earth, the earth has land, water, and land, water, and air. And all of a sudden, air became my focus because we were so smothered in trees that had it. And I would go out, and I still do it. I go out on my porch every morning and just breathe the air and thank God for it. But anyway, so, nothing really falls into a place that makes me feel like we've gotten anywhere. Certainly haven't gotten anywhere in terms of the church's commitment.
Yeah, we've got a long ways to go, it feels like sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I know that I've been so grateful in my life for women religious and just Catholic women who have, I think, led the way in trying to envision a different way of being church. I know that I've been so inspired in my own faith, the story of FOCIS and what you were able to accomplish with FOCIS and in trying to envision a new way of being church that did all the things that you were just talking about, even when maybe the hierarchy wasn't so attentive to those things, that you were out there doing that, and the church is still catching up to what women like yourself and Monica and Sister Gretchen and, and Sister Beth have all done. Would you want to say a couple words about FOCIS and what, how you got, where the idea for FOCIS came from and how that has shaped your ministry?
Oh, gosh. It's been so long since I've even thought about it.
Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah. Because I just kept running along with time and focused, into different sections and see, I don't know. I think I love being in an area that has a few focus people, so it kind of connects. But I think there's something missing. I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah.
But I guess nothing's perfect, and when you want to feel like you're the presence of the church, it's pretty hard when you're in a place where, number one, there is no church. Number two, there's never a priest that's there in a real long-term commitment. And then you have to travel so far to get there. And the older you get, the harder it is.
Yeah.
So I guess I still think of myself as a Catholic, and I still remember my earlier days before I joined the convent. And the excitement I had in high school when my sister, who was a year older than me, was in another Catholic high school, and she came and told me about FOCIS. And I just thought immediately, doggone it, I want to join them. I don't want to be a foreign missionary because I never could understand other languages anyway. So I just, that caught my interest immediately.
Yeah.
I can understand.
I got there, and one of the first jobs I had was cooking for the seminary, and they were still building the Glenmary seminary at the time. So half the time you didn't even have a decent place to cook the food that I was sending through the little pathway to, what was it? I think there were about 30 men studying that I did for a couple of years.
Cirillo.
Yeah. Yeah, so you were cooking for him, huh?
Yes.
Oh,
Which was, you know, I enjoyed cooking. And the men washed and dried the dishes at the supper time. And the other meals I took care of in between the cooking.
yeah.
Which was, you know, I didn't resent that at all.
Mm.
And I guess when I got out on mission, I was sent to a place where we had a school in Kentucky. And I thought, God, I hated school, and now I have to teach in school. So I lived through a couple of years of that.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, I guess when FOCIS came into being, it seemed right. And we have a mixture, you know, we're not just Catholic. But anyway,
Yeah.
Here I am at 90 years old, and glad to still be in the mountains, and glad that the coal, you know, there's no coal being worked on anymore.
Mm.
We have to watch the trees because outsiders are coming and trying to get ownership and cutting the trees down. And I thought, gosh, you know, these trees are the carbon that keeps our air clean.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a interesting place and moment in my life. And I think the place I'd be quite satisfied to die.
Yeah. Well, Marie, it's such an honor to have you here with us this evening, to hear some of your stories and to get to hear your voice. And so grateful for the things that you've done in the mountains and the voice that you've been for justice, for hope, the way that you speak for the earth and speak for the trees, which are sometimes the last that we hear, right? The last voice that we take seriously is the voice of the earth. And so grateful for your continued ministry and your continued witness.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I know that it's late, Marie, and you were saying you wanted to slip off. We're going to let some of the other panelists talk, and, you know, would love to have you continue to stay and just listen.
Oh, yeah, I will.
Okay. And have you been able to, when Sister Jane and when Sister Beth were talking, were you able to hear them? Okay. Okay. Perfect. I kind of wanted to jump to you so that you could share before it got too late and to make sure you were hearing everybody.
Yeah.
So just go ahead and just sit back and listen. And if you feel like you want to jump off at any point, just go right ahead. I know it's late, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Joe Holland.
Good, wonderful.
All right.
And I think it's just wonderful you're doing this, pulling us together again. Yeah.
We're glad to have you, Marie.
Thanks. Okay, Joe Holland, where are you?
Joe, you with us?
Is he here?
I don't know.
Okay, I unmuted. Yeah. All right.
There we go. Great.
Thank you, Ed, and great to hear your voice, Marie. I love what you said about cooking. My father always told me, marry an Italian woman and you'll be so happy. I married a Puerto Rican, however, but equally happy though. But I lived one time with two elderly Italian priests, and in the morning, the first thing we did at breakfast was talk, and it continued all through the day, planning the dinner. It was wonderful. I think it's the most beautiful thing about Italian culture is the food and the people. Okay, it's great to see so many old friends, and Beth, and Carol and Les and Marcus and Glenda, and Marie yourself, and John. I think also who's with us in spirit, John Roush, a wonderful man, and Jeannie and Mike. I'm very, very happy to be part of this. I apologize. I missed a bit because my sound and my mic was not working. So I finally logged off and shut down the computer and started up, and now it works fine. I don't know what the explanation is, but it works. Some background. Les came to the Center of Concern, was in a center started by the initiative out of the International Jesuits, Pedro Rupe, and the U.S. Catholic bishops at the time, to have a think tank that would work in conjunction with the United Nations. And he came here because he wanted us to, he felt we had some background on colonialism. Of course, as John Roush said in the video, that Appalachia was a mineral and also a timber colony before that. And now maybe a timber colony again, I guess. That's why we were brought in. And I was assigned to do it because I had been living in Chile during the last year of the Allende government, and as a young priest, I had worked in Latin America and with Hispanic communities in the Northeast of the United States, and a pastoral experience with that. And from the early '60s, I began to get exposed to what would later become liberation theology before it even became a name. And then when I went to study at the University of Chicago, I focused on that. And they had a wonderful program there in which we linked theology, social science, and philosophy. It was eventually shut down because it was too subversive. And now they only let them study psychology. No social science and no philosophy. Anyway, that's how I guess I got drawn into it. I had also lived for a while at the Catholic Worker in New York, and everyone, of course, always talks about Dorothy Day, but and she deserves all the talking she can get, including sainthood. But the person who impressed me most of all was Peter Morin. He was what Antonio Gramsci would have called an organic intellectual. And I continue to believe that Peter Morin was a prophet ahead of his times, and that he had a vision and that we should be following now as what I call, we're in the middle already, entering into the breakdown of what I call in modern industrial civilization. And we're in the breakdown of the modern industrial colonial form of Catholicism as well, Western Catholicism, not the Eastern churches. They're very resourceful at the moment, but the Western church is a catastrophe, as is Western industrial civilization. I think Western civilization is resilient and could perhaps, in dialogue with other global civilizations, produce something new. But the time is short. We are facing a threat to the biosphere of the planet. It is quite conceivable that we could extinguish much of life on planet Earth, including human life. I think that industrial civilization will break down in very traumatic form, in which there will be large numbers of death. People will be searching for food, water, and so on. We're in a traumatic position. CCA is enormously resourceful because I think the less you're involved in urbanization, the better. The closer you are to nature, the closer you are to God. But the urban industrial church is doomed, I think, as is in urban industrial civilization. I wrote a little pamphlet about Peter Morin. It's called, I don't know if you get it up there, say his views, if you want to read it. If you go to Amazon, you have to buy it, but I didn't mean to sell it. What I wrote is only 15 pages long. And on my website, joe-holland.net, you can download a PDF of it. But I truly believe he had a 3-part program, and CCA has implicitly, I think, been following that. I won't get into it at all, but and also there's been a great deal of talk about women religious here, and what they accomplished was just extraordinary, just extraordinary. They were the secret weapon of Catholicism for the modern industrial civilization, which was, I describe it as hyper-masculine. They provided early on what I jokingly would describe as the Catholic Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which was copied by the social welfare state. Social welfare state just picked up what Catholic sisters had done early on, right from the beginning, because women in the rural peasant villages had provided all these services. But with the urban industrial civilization, hyper-masculine, it was all wiped out. And then women religious came in and began to rebuild the feminine side of that was missing from modern industrial civilization. Now we must go deeper, I think. The most fundamental change is the shift to ecological spirituality. And that's much deeper than care for the earth. As Thomas Berry has taught us, the earth is the primary revelation. The Bible is the secondary revelation. It's like the Bible is the hospital to fix the wounded earth. But if you live in the hospital and think that's your whole life, you really are sick, you know. God is in the world, God is, and especially God is in nature. And one of the reasons why society is becoming so secularized is because there are no trees, no plants, no animals in the city, by and large, you know. And so anyway, unfortunately, but this happens all the time, we are at the end of the long cycle of what is called the apostolic stage of religious life. It was an extraordinary thing. The first time women began to really assert their incredible gifts in society because under the patriarchal classical civilization, that was not feasible. However, that has now ended because I won't get into, I wrote a book, Postmodern Ecological Spirituality, in which I laid that out, but why it's breaking down. But the foundation of what I call another book I wrote, excuse my advertising, but called the next stage of Catholic religious life, has to be grounded in ecological spirituality. We had first the foundational lay church grounded in the New Testament. Then we had the Cenobitical movement, which was actually a lay movement and actually had thousands of families in it, although the religious historians never reported that. They were really eco-villages, the Cenobitical movement. Then came monasticism, first Irish Celtic monasticism, which are really the ones that planted the foundation for the renewal of Europe. And then the Benedictines built on that very well, but they were not missionaries. They wanted to flee the world, but the Irish Celtic monasticism had embraced the world, and they quickly evangelized the German tribes who had destroyed the Roman Empire by their invasion. But because the Irish monks were coming from tribes themselves, two groups of tribal people, they got along very well. And then when civilization began to rebuild, and then we got the Mendicant movement, the wonderful Franciscans and Dominicans. But then it got more complex, and it wasn't sufficient just to have these preachers or wandering beggars, and there emerged the apostolic form of religious life, most famously with Ignatius of Loyola, but with an exploding orchestra of spirituality with women religious, which were really the heart of it and the life of it. Now, they were ministering to the victims of industrial civilization. But now as industrial civilization is collapsing, we need something new. And the Holy Spirit will bring it forth. I know that will happen. And I believe, and Peter Morin, he had, his 3-part program. That is one, first, by the way, he said, always begin with clarification of thought. The intellectual life for Peter was foundational. And Peter, by the way, did not reject technology, although a lot of Catholic workers think he did. For heaven's sakes, he teamed up with a big, giant printing press in the pre-electronic era to produce a newspaper right away, with Dorothy. So he is pro-technology, but which technology? Of course, now it must be the electronic technologies. But his 3-part thing is, first of all, that you have to have that you have the 3-part, the Green Revolution, what I would call eco-villages. He called them communes. Catholic workers thought it was a farm, but Peter actually gave an interview saying the Americans think that you're supposed to leave everybody and go start a farm by yourself. No, in French, commune means village. You create a village. Or more importantly, as what's his name in Abington, Virginia, another one beautiful Italian name, the organic farmer, and Beth, Anthony Flacavento. He's written a magnificent book about the renewal of rural life. We don't have to restart eco-villages. They're already there. They're all over rural America. We need to expand them. And the Bible for that, by the way, I think is the book that Anthony Flacavento wrote for that. Yeah. And then secondly, urban houses of hospitality. But they aren't just caring for the poor. Again, to rebuild community development. And there's a wonderful couple in Kirshner, Ontario, who's models that. Community development in urban areas, not just food kitchens, certainly food kitchens too, but urban development. And finally, and this is what was always a great mystery to everybody, the agronomic university. Peter was so disillusioned with universities, and especially with Catholic universities, and especially with Catholic university professors. He couldn't believe how awful they were. You know, he really got angry at them, and he didn't know what it was. But it must be something that's connected to the rural commune, and which workers would become scholars, and scholars would become workers. So you would be farming while you would be studying. And I think here we have the example of the Mondragon cooperatives in the north of Spain, where the workers own, they don't have farms, but they could do that. You could also have an agricultural system. The workers own the factories they work in, and among the young people, they work in the morning, and in the afternoon they go to a university that they own, which is a cooperative. So I think we need a rural cooperative university system and a rural cooperative system that would be rebuilt tremendously, and this would be a great and wonderful challenge for CCA in the future. I just would say that we are in the middle of a traumatic, confusing, frightening, and dangerous period of human history in which the very life system at the planet is at stake. Nothing less than that. Huh? Francis is wonderful, but he's not going to be able to pull it off. You know, we're going to need grassroots things from all over, from everywhere. And I would also add, I think that the African church is probably the richest resource that we have so far, but it'll be Africa, Asia, Latin America. I think Europe and North America will have to follow the lead of the global South. But the Holy Spirit is present in the whole world. And I know something will happen despite the terrible traumas that will come. Something will happen that will begin to regenerate the life system of the planet. And I think CCA could play a major prophetic role of that in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. We're going to turn it over to Father Les Schmidt. You with us still, Les?
Yes.
All right. Let's hear it.
Didn't disappear.
I bow to Beth Davies.
Where's your wisdom?
Well, let me put it in context. I was ordained in '61 with the Glenmary Home Missioners, and I came to the region called Appalachia with the first group that I connected with was the Council of the Southern Mountains in Berea, Kentucky. It was headed up by a very open evangelical peace pastor, and they were looking for somebody to work with them. So I connected, and they allowed me to go all over the country. Remember, at that time in history, it was Vietnam, the whole thing on peace and the possibility of tomorrow. And so I would go wherever they sent me. I might be in Long Island, I might be in Cincinnati, wherever they sent me, and that's where I would go. Because the whole thing was, we've got to stand up for peace. But then the next thing that unfolded was the CORA, Commission on Religion in Appalachia, out of Knoxville, Tennessee, where the coordinator came down from New York City, very open, very ecumenical, but the key people were women, especially former Glenmary sisters. They were absolutely wonderful. And what unfolded on that, the sisters really wanted to be open to everyone. And so what happened, the group moved from a very closed group where it was the person from New York City to the other Protestant ministers. The Catholic caucus became so strong, they became a threat to the group within the ecumenical group. And so it was the women who made the change, made the difference. They then moved from just within CORA, Commission on Religion in Appalachia, to a caucus, the Catholic Committee of Appalachia, moving outside. The bishops really approved this because it was like their money coming from CHD would not go to these outside Protestant groups, but would go directly to the Catholic groups, which they felt was very positive. And so in terms of that first gathering, the CCA moved from being a part of CORA, Commission on Religion in Appalachia, to its own independent entity, 501c3. Then what happened, I was on a meeting up in Bethany College, up near Wheeling, bringing somebody from the Black Lung to get tested. And I was in the back of the room of that gathering because, see, when they go through these testings, it takes hours upon hours upon hours. And so it was the women who made all of this possible. But at that meeting in Bethany, it was the men, all the men. There was Pat Ronan out of Southwest Virginia, John Klug out of Wheeling, Charleston. It was the guy out of the USCCB. They all made the decision, and they said, well, Les is just hanging out. He's not doing anything. Why can't he go ahead and coordinate this? And so I had just brought this guy up from Black Lung, sitting back at the meeting. And of course, I hung out a lot. I was all over the place. So I said, sure, I'll do it. So I immediately went to Wheeling College, which at that stage was the place to go. And they said, no, we can't help you. But they sent me to Center for Concern in Washington, D.C. And who did they send me to? Joe Holland. Well, not really. Bill Ryan and Pete Henrio. But there was this underlying guy called Joe Holland. And so what I checked in with them, and they said, we're on overload, but look, what about this guy called Joe Holland? Well, so I checked in with Joe, and Joe was wonderful. It was, I don't know how to say it, but I started off with encouraging him to listen to the people, and he was right on board. But I checked in terms of, look, we can't just do it with peopleese, the doctrinaire stuff that comes down from the Pope. But there was this Dutch priest who really put it in people language, and it was marvelous. He just picked up on that, and his first draft of the possibility of the Pastoral, I dropped in the wastebasket, and he didn't even wince a moment. He went right back upstairs and started. And I said, Joe, look, we got to do it. It's got to be the music. It's got to be, where the people are coming from the region. He agreed totally. And he right away moved. Then he came, and Beth Davies and he listened. What happened, I was at a meeting in Bethany College, just outside of Wheeling, when there were, it was not the women now, but the women made it all possible. I cannot say enough about the women who made it all possible. But at that meeting in Bethany College, it was 3 men. There was John Klug, who was from the Wheeling, Charleston. There was Pat Ronan, Southwest Virginia. There was Steve Bossy from you see, he was the guy from Real Life. And they said, well, he's not doing it. He just hangs out. He doesn't do shit. So, he can do this. And so I agreed. I said, yeah, I'll do it. So in terms of where I went then immediately to college, but they said, we don't have anybody available. We're on overload. But they sent me to Center of Concern. And there was Bill Ryan, Pete Henrio, and they both said, no way. But then they said, this guy, new guy, Joe Holland, he's a fellow here, go with him. So I did, and Joe said, hey, I'm with you. We go from there.
Wow. Thanks, Les, for sharing. Speaking of women, we've got 3 more women to turn it over to. So we're going to go to Carol Warren next.
Well, hey, everybody. It's wonderful to see the names of so many friends in the list of participants. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you here. I am so proud and pleased to say that I am a 10th generation West Virginian. And so this land is not only home to me, it is my blood and bone. And I have always felt that way. I got involved with CCA through the good offices of a friend. I moved to Harlan County in southeastern Kentucky to do parish ministry in 1987. And I hadn't the foggiest idea how to structure such a ministry. And so wisely, as it turned out, decided not to try to start programs, but to hook into programs that were already successful and see what I could learn and how I could accompany people. And since I always loved stories and my degrees are in English, it seemed that the adult reading program would be a good fit for me. And it happened to be directed at that time by Rochester, Minnesota Franciscan sister, Mary Cullen. And she invited me to a CCA meeting that fall. As it turned out, that was really a fateful meeting. It wasn't an easy meeting, and it wasn't always a pleasantly toned meeting, shall we say, because it was about models of ministry. And some people were delighted and inspired, and some people were horrified and offended, depending on what models they perceived themselves as using and what was being said about their particular model. The model that I really had wanted to do was to be a ministry of accompaniment, to do things with people rather than for people. Because with my own knowledge of Appalachian people, I had always found them to be extremely resourceful and extremely smart, whatever their level of education was. And just because you didn't have degrees but behind your name didn't mean that you weren't extremely intelligent. And so I was involved with the literacy program for a number of years and did recorded interviews with some of the students and made little booklets out of what they said that were at about the right reading level for most of our students, and showed people that their stories were valuable and they needed to tell them. So that was kind of how I got involved. I'm grateful that Eddie started out with the playing of This Land is Home to Me, and mentioning that was a woman that wrote that. There were a lot of women involved in CCA at the time that I was on the board in the early 90s. And one of the things that I loved was This Land is Home to Me. I had gotten so that I really cared for that document and thought that it was wonderful and inspiring. But by the early 90s, it was also evident that a lot of things had changed, and there were issues that were pressing at that time that had not been as pressing in 1975. So I was at actually a Pax Christi meeting, I believe, with Bishop Sullivan, and said to him, you know, Bishop Sullivan, I love This Land Is Home to Me, but, you know, could we update it? Could we get Joe to write some more material and insert some things in it to bring it more up to date? And Bishop Sullivan said, let me think about that. So he must have talked to a lot of other people about it, because eventually, one of the next times I saw him, he said, no, that document is a classic in the way that it is. We don't want to touch that. Let's get Joe and we'll do another one. So he formed a consulting team, which I was privileged to be part of. And there are a number of people on this call who were a part of that too. Hi, Marcus and Glenda. And so we started that out. And it was a very interesting process, because being fortunate also to work on the Telling Takes Us Home, I know what a different kind of collaborative process that was when you weren't looking to get the bishops to sign onto it, which we still were with At Home in the Web of Life. And there were a lot of things that some of us, I think those of you who were there will agree, that we thought maybe should be in the pastoral. And Bishop Sullivan would say, you're not ever going to get the bishops to sign on if you talk about land reform, you know, for example. So some of the ideas didn't make it into the document. But now tell me, Joe, if I get any of this wrong. Joe had given the document sort of a working title of The Web of Life. And we all liked that concept. But as it turned out, during the time that we were also working on that document, Fritjof Capra came out with his book called The Web of Life. And so that sort of put a crimp in that. And then Bishop Sullivan said, well, you know, This Land Is Home to Me. That has such a down home, cozy feel to it. You know, I'd like for this one to be called something that sort of has that same feeling. So we all sort of sat there gazing at our navels for a few minutes, and then started, you know, throwing out sort of some alternative titles. And I said, how about At Home in the Web of Life? And Bishop Sullivan liked that immediately. It seemed to have the feel that he wanted. And if other people didn't like it, they didn't say so. And so it came to be called that, sort of honoring both Bishop Sullivan's desire for a cozy title and also Joe's concept of the Web of Life. And so the second Bishop's Pastoral also got a title from a woman. Yay! yeah, right on. But my time with CCA was wonderful. I immediately found a whole network of friends and people working in the area that I could call on when I had difficulties. And they were such a wonderful support system. I will always remember very fondly the board meetings and the give and take that people had, and wonderful people. I think Andrea Walpe is on this call. She was on the board at the same time I was. And people like Joe Paschal and Sister Carolyn Brank, and Evelyn Detling. There were just a lot of wonderful people. And I will never forget them and the impact that they had on my life. And it's wonderful to be here among all of you again. Love you all.
Thanks so much, Carol.
Thank you.
let's turn it over to Monica Appleby.
I came to the Appalachian region in 1959 with the Glenmary sisters and lived in Big Stone Gap in Wise County and worked in home visiting and doing Bible schools in camps and hollers. And the Glenmary sisters, through actually contact with Les Schmidt, and became involved in the Council of Southern Mountains, and I became the rep on the board. The position that Les had, he put my name in. And then I got involved with people who were forming the CORA, the Commission on Religion in Appalachia. And I was among the first people that worked on organizing that ecumenical group. And I was the only woman actually at the meetings in the beginning. I just want to say a word about This Land is Home to Me. It was written by Maureen Linneman, and it was when she was a Glenmary sister and was an Appalachian volunteer. And the Appalachian volunteers were Vista volunteers in the very, very, very early days. And she had been at a workshop at the Highlander Center. And when she came back, she went into one of the hollers, Artesian Well Holler, and listened, and had been working in the camps and hollers all along. And that's when she wrote the song. She was still a Glenmary sister, but soon we became the Federation of Communities in Service. And that was because we thought we were answering the call of Vatican II and changed our organization so that we were less controlled in an authoritarian way. And that our missions were self-managed in some ways. And we wanted to change our clothes. We didn't want to wear a long habit up in the hollers. And that was a big deal. So then we became the Federation of Communities in Service to continue our work in Appalachia. And I can't say that I was very involved. I was very involved in CORA and in the Council of Southern Mountains and the Appalachian Volunteers. But I wasn't that involved in the Catholic Committee on Appalachia. I married and became part of a farm community in Scott County, which is also in Southwest Virginia. And before that, I was the first coordinator of the Office of Appalachian Ministry in the Diocese of Wheeling. And here's another connection. Anthony Flacavento came into the region as by that time they called him the director of the Peace and Justice Office for the Diocese of Richmond, which Wheeling became. Wheeling, West Virginia, had Southwest Virginia counties within its structure. So so that's how Anthony came into the region, and he has made a big difference. The other thing I wanted to say was this is a reconnection for me with the Catholic Committee in Appalachia, and I really appreciated Ched Meyer's presentation at that first day, because it reminded me of the group that I'm part of in Scott County. It's called the River Farm, and we're a cooperative group, but we didn't want to be an enclave. We started in '72. So we were very much part of that community of Dungannon. And we did the things that Ched Myers mentioned. We brought out the settlement history, which was by a Catholic, Patrick Hagan, for which this church, St. Patrick's, was named for, who got the land through his uncle who purchased it for, you know, nothing. And so the Catholics were very much, and the Catholic Church was very much part of the settlement history and of controlling that land. It also made a contribution at the same time. So, and then we also very much were involved with the early history of the indigenous people and the local people. So I was very much affirmed by Ted Meyer's talk, and I want to continue more in pursuing that. So I'm glad to be part of this group, a little bit back into the Catholic Committee on Appalachia, and it's good to see all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a blessing to have you with us. We have one more, last, but I know from experience, certainly not least, Sir Gretchen Shaffer. Would you like to? The floor is yours. Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me?
We got you.
Can you hear me?
We got you.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I want to tell you that I appreciate so much being named as a woman of wisdom, because I have been called worse things than that. And years ago, I used to have some preliminary control over the Campaign for Human Development Funds in the diocese, and I was interviewing a fellow who had applied for money, and he asked me if I knew Monica Appleby. And I said that I did, and he identified her as a dynamite woman. And from then on, for at least 2 decades, I wanted to be a dynamite woman, but no, I never was. But now I'm a woman of wisdom. Jackie Henrihan referred to the Catholic ghetto, and after Vatican II, Beth made a reference to the fact that the one group that picked up on Vatican documents and really ran with it were sisters. And as a result of our taking the Second Vatican Council documents about women religious seriously, we were like a runaway train. We really scared some of the men and continued to intimidate them. But anyway, I decided in this radical change that women religious were undergoing, taking off habits and doing other works, to leave the Catholic ghetto. And I stepped out of school teaching and became involved with the Office of Social Action and Catholic Charities in the Diocese of Wheeling. I've always lived in West Virginia. Like Carol, my family goes way back. My father was a coal miner. And as Beth was talking about coal miners not really wanting to mine coal, I think my dad got that job on the tail end of the Great Depression. He subsequently had 5 sons, and he didn't want any of them to go into the mines, and none of them ever did. But at any rate, I came to Wheeling and met John Klug, and he had been reading things coming out of the Center of Concern for some time. John was a man that was very much imbued by social action. Social justice was a very important thing for him. He put out a terrific newsletter. I think Beth has commented on it before. It was most original. It influenced a lot of people. But at any rate, he wanted me to get involved with the CCA. And so I wasn't sure that I wanted to do that. But another Glenmary priest besides Les that was very dynamic with the CCA was John Barry.
Yeah.
And John Barry was so enthusiastic about things that everything just rolled before him, because he loved the Catholic Community of Appalachia. He loved the people of Appalachia. And then he was subsequently staff for CCA. He had an office in Prestonsburg, Kentucky, that was also his dwelling place, and he was assisted by Sister Ida. And John Klug always called that office in Prestonsburg World Headquarters, CCA's World Headquarters. So when the pastoral letter then that Joe and Les took us through some of those early stages of it, was finally promulgated, it happened in Wheeling. The lead bishop for the promulgation was not Bishop Hodges from Wheeling, although he was very instrumental in moving the pastoral letter along. So it was ready to be promulgated, and it was delayed. The reason it was delayed was because at the last moment, the bishop held exception to a political cartoon that was in the first issue of the paper. And so people were given markers to obliterate the names in this political cartoon. So when somebody made the reference that a pastoral letter would have been quite different if it didn't have to be written, I think Joe Holland was talking about that, if it didn't have to be written so that the bishops would approve it. There were several. I have a first edition of the pastoral letter, first issue. I have a second one, and it does change. And I'm sure that the pastoral letter would have been much more radical if it didn't have to be approved by the bishops. But at any rate, that was a little interesting sideline that this political cartoon wasn't ready for public consumption. It was a cartoon that was critical of oil companies and multinational corporations, that kind of thing. But at any rate, the pastoral letter was revolutionary in my mind. I thought, oh my gosh, this is just a terrific thing. I grew up, as I say, in West Virginia, and my family had lived here for a long time. Nobody ever told me I was Appalachian. I never heard that before. It kind of grew out of, I think, the Appalachian Regional Commission, which was a tax-funded organization, kind of came on the heels of the Kennedys' interest in Appalachia. And so then all of a sudden, there wasn't much talk about this region, and then we were identified that way. But certainly, I knew about mountain people. Before when I was in Catholic schools, I was stationed in Bristol, Virginia. Monica mentioned that 16 counties in southwestern Virginia were once part of the Wheeling Diocese. And so I was there in this school, and I became acquainted with the Glenmary sisters. So they were probably the first people to raise my awareness about the very poor. And then, in addition to, I mean, Monica's made reference, Marie Cirillo, but Anne Liebig was in particularly a person who, it seemed to me, once I got to this Wheeling position, that what was really going on regarding social change was all going on in southwestern Virginia. Lots of exciting things were happening there. So then I thought to myself, well, what could I do to respond to this pastoral letter? And it seemed to me that the thing that I had the most talent for was teaching. I had loved teaching. And through Mary Margaret Pignoni and Sean Scanlon, two sisters in Notre de Namur, who had come to Mingo County, West Virginia, several years before, they made a contact with a group that had started a land trust in Mingo County. And they were of the opinion, and I was in agreement with this, that what would break the cycle of poverty was education. So they wanted to start a school. There had been a lot of consolidation of schools, which closed little community schools in remote areas and a rough and tumble area like Mingo County. Mingo County is, even to this day, almost, it's 80% forested. So it's, you know, it's not an easy place to get around. But at any rate, I met the folks that wanted to start the school. I thought that that would be an exciting, interesting thing to do, a little project, you know, for a few years, get a little school started. My problem was I had never ever taught children to read. By the time they came to me in the Catholic schools, they all knew how to read, and I didn't know how to teach children how to read. And then by the providence of God, I got a phone call from Kathy O'Hagan, who says, I hear you want to start a school in Mingo County. She says, I want to do that too. So now the rest is history, because we've been here for 44 years. We did start the school, and we have had what amounts to a Center for Popular Culture. We have always been enlivened by the pastoral letter. We are visited by scores of college students and high school students have come here over the years for spring break and fall break, and we always talk to them about this land is home to me, and the principal things in that. There was a thought I wanted to put in about, well, I wanted to particularly mention John Klug, but I also wanted to say that he was a great friend of the Jesuits. He loved Jesuits. And so he put a challenge out to the Jesuits at Wheeling College that none of them, you know, to live in an ivory tower was not really what West Virginia was about. They needed to get out among the people. And as a consequence of that, Joe Hackala and Joe Peschel and Rob Curry came to Lincoln County, West Virginia in 1976, the same year that Kath and I came to Mingo County. And they did much of the same kind of work that the pastoral letter was calling for. And then ultimately, Joe Hackala was instrumental in getting the Appalachian Institute started, which is headquartered in Wheeling, at Wheeling University now. John Klug was a very, very creative man. He has passed, as have a number of these people. Joe Hackala has died, Joe Peschel has died, some of those folks. But it is a wonderfully encouraging thing to me to see so many people who have had an influence on me and the person that I am today in this CCA meeting. And I only regret that we have to do this long distance, because while it's very nice to be able to communicate this way on Zoom, it's not quite the same as embracing your friends.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Can I make a comment there, Rob? Eddie. When we're talking about the title of the pastoral letter, there was a time early on that the upper region in the Pittsburgh area and that area were very, very active with CCA, very much so. And we were up in a place outside of Pittsburgh at one of the priests there who had a mission, who had a parish there. And we was talking about this pastoral. We were talking about different things. And John Barry, who was with us, you mentioned John Barry, who was the executive director of CCA initially. And then we were just trying to think about what will we call this document. We had the document, but we didn't have a name for it. And I can remember John Barry saying, you know, this group down in Eastern Tennessee, that was Maureen Linneman's group, he said they had a song, "This Land is Home to Me." And he said, wouldn't that be a wonderful title for this pastoral? I mean, you can see all the connections. you know, how connected things were. Here, we're up in Pittsburgh, outside of Pittsburgh, at Portview, and he brought that up, and he said, this land is, because they were trying to think of a title. What would be homey? What would be good? And that's where it came out of. So I was thinking, as we're talking, you know, all these connections in different areas, and that came out of the northern region when we were up there in the Pittsburgh area, which is just amazing.
Thanks so
It's
much,
great.
Sister Beth. I just want to thank each of you for sharing some of your wisdom. You know, Sister Monica, you talked a little bit about Ched Myers, right, in some of his presentation. He talked about this importance of intergenerationality that he mentioned, and that's something that has really stuck with me. The last few months, getting to be on Zoom calls with all of you as we planned this has been a tremendous privilege in my own life. The Catholic Committee of Appalachia and the ministries that all of you have done to make This Land is Home to Me possible and to carry that vision forward are the reasons that I'm still Catholic and the reasons that I have a faith in God, because it was something that I was really struggling with in high school. And a fella who I knew gave me a copy of This Land is Home to Me and said, you should read this. And I read it, and it was the first time I ever thought, I was very passionate about social justice, but as many of you expressed, I didn't think that my faith had anything to say about that. And you all proved that wrong. You all showed me that there's another way of expressing faith in God and a way of understanding how we're grounded in place that I had never thought of before. And this idea of being Appalachian came to me for the first time. So it's just been such a privilege to get to hear your stories and to talk with all of you over the last few months. We're coming up at 9 o'clock. So I just wanted to say thank you all. Something I want to make sure we give time for is I wanted to turn it over to Sarah George. Something that Sister Beth mentioned was, you know, this whole as we were planning this, 50 years, Ched Myers talked about, is a time for regathering, remembering, and envisioning the future. So earlier in the annual gathering, some of the young folks of CCA got together and talked about what our vision of the next 50 years is, what our hopes are for CCA's next Jubilee. Because we envision ourselves in your places in 50 years. And so Sarah's going to share a little bit. We would like your blessing on our vision. As you share your wisdom with us, we would just like to hear from you on what our vision is for the next 50 years. So Sarah's going to take a couple minutes and share, and then maybe you all will have some comments or at least can bless our vision.
Thanks, Ed. CCA is such a story-focused organization, so in honor of that and in thanksgiving for all of the stories that you all shared this evening, I wanted to share just briefly a bit of my story with those of you who don't know me. I'm an Appalachia transplant. I'm an Illinois native who largely grew up in suburban Baltimore. I found my way to Appalachia, to the foothills, by way of the Glenmary Home Missioners and their farm in Vanceburg, Kentucky, which I reopened as a Emmaus farm after it was closed in 2014. After spending some time volunteering in the region, I've lived here full-time for almost 4 years next month, as the director of Emmaus Farm, a retreat center where we host high school and college volunteer groups for service with the Lewis County community, Appalachian cultural immersion, and spiritual retreat with an emphasis on Catholic social teaching. I joined the CCA board almost 3 years ago and have had the privilege of serving as your vice chair for the past 2 years. I've said before that finding CCA, meeting all of you, reading and praying with the 3 pastoral letters has really given home to the urgings of my heart that were largely born of living in these foothills here in Kentucky. I share this bit of my story because you are all a part of it. I follow in the footsteps of all of you the young adults of CCA walk the path you've carved for us. When the way gets hard, we look to your words in the pastorals. We look to the wisdom of your experiences. We seek the guidance of your example. On Sunday of the annual gathering weekend, those of us in our 20s and 30s joined a morning coffee hour, and like CCA, it was member-led and discussion-based. The desire to have an event like this came from a collection of many conversations among members seeking community, connection, and fellowship, especially in light of increased isolation in 2020. Realizing that the next 50 years of CCA belong to us, we asked ourselves what we want those 50 years to look like, and what it looks like for us to be the church we wish to see in the world in 2020 and beyond. That coffee hour allowed us to brainstorm a few ways we can increase the connection we desire. Here are a few strategies that came forth from that conversation. 2020 has helped us see how much we really can do online, including both business meetings as well as fellowship. So we suggested monthly Zoom calls among young adult members. Another way this online collegiality can be maintained is with regular emails, perhaps with resources like articles, documentaries, and prayer and reflection series for liturgical seasons and feast days. When we are able to safely gather in person, we would like to implement quarterly fellowship gatherings, maybe with beer and a bonfire at places like my home, Emmaus Farm in Vanceburg, or places like Big Laurel or the Appalachian Catholic Worker Farm. Places where we could have an overnight gathering with no agenda, but rather a source of friendship and celebration of each other's work for justice for Appalachia. During the coffee hour, we heard calls for increased CCA membership in parishes so that we could each cultivate more of a community of CCA in our own locations.
Has Sarah George been here?
A lot of us work with college students on both ends of immersion trips, sending them from universities and hosting groups here in Appalachia. We would like to find ways to connect with each other, to celebrate and support our work, but also to find ways to continue to engage college students who visit the region. These ways of connecting honor the fact that CCA is such an intergenerational group and celebrate the history of CCA that we have all entered into. In remembering CCA's roots, we aim to cultivate a radically Christian future, similar to the early church, dependent on fellowship and small communities. We recognize that as some CCA members are being called home, we are being called to action, to work together, to keep the voices in the pastoral letters alive for the next 50 years. These are the ways we feel we can fulfill our desire for togetherness while staying rooted in place, while supporting, celebrating, and sustaining our work, while being a prophetic voice of justice for Appalachia and her people, while being the church we want to see in the world. We are the future of CCA, and the next 50 years are our responsibility. We bring to you, our elders, the plans and dreams we've cultivated, asking for your wisdom, guidance, and blessing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I don't know if any of you all, our elders, our wisdom figures, have any words of advice or words of response.
Never tire of hope.
Yeah, that's right. What I wanted to say, I picked up today, it just came in the mail to me, and part of it was, you all know Mount Tabor there, and the Sisters of the Dwelling Place Monastery there. And it was interesting when I picked it up, it just fit in with what we were doing here. But they were saying they're spending much more time now alone at the monastery because they always had groups coming in and that would stay at the monastery, and they'd have different groups throughout the year. And of course now they can't do that with COVID. So they're there with much time to reflect and to really look at themselves and their future. And they said, as they were looking at their being there, they said it started back in 1975 when Sister Judy Yunker read the Appalachian Bishop's Pastoral letter, "This land is home to me." And the letter asked for prayer centers to be established so ministers working in the mountains would have a place to come for renewal and relaxation. And so she and I came, and this was Eileen with her, and the Dwelling Place Prayer Center was established, eventually becoming the Dwelling Place Monastery. But you can see out of the pastoral, and then the call, and then Judy Yunker becoming acquainted with it, and then right away, you know. So I just picked that up yesterday, it came in the mail, and I thought how fitting it is in some of what we're doing right now, you know, all of that, how things grow and connect and what becomes out of, you know, the writing of these pastorals. But anyway, I just wanted to share that.
I wanted to say that I thought what you lined out, Sarah, was wonderful. But one of the things, especially for Kath and me, when we undertook a very difficult work in 1976, was the parties. You know, CCA used to meet twice a year, spring and fall, and we always looked forward so much to the celebrations, the parties. And I remember somebody in Cora made the remark one time that that was one of the things CCA was noted for. That it was a very great celebratory time. I mean, not to sound frivolous, we dealt with serious things as well, but those parties were so wonderful. And so when you made a reference to gathering different places to have a bonfire or whatever, that's a very, very important component, I think. And a lot of friendships were made and strengthened through that socialization. So I encourage you to do that. More parties. More parties.
More parties, Sarah. Remember that.
One thing I remember was the square dances. We always had a square.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Square dance.
Remember Catherine Rumschlag would lead the square dancing.
I wanted to mention one of the reasons I stay in the church is because of liturgy. And I was also really impressed with the liturgy that you organized and pulled off on the Sunday of the first, for the weekend of CCA's 50th. And I think that you're good at it. And I was impressed, and I would encourage you to keep that up too, as well as the parties.
As well as parties. What was interesting about the parties, we used to party practically all night, and we'd be practically morning, and we'd have to start our work again. But as we got older, we began to notice the parties diminished because we were mostly older then, and the parties kind of went away, and we went to bed. So we have to get the young people here to start partying again, because it was great. We had great parties.
Well, I would just like to say that listening to Sarah and what the young people brought up, I have no fears at all about the future of CCA. We are leaving it in wonderful, capable, spirit-filled hands. Thank you. Blessings.
I think, unless there's any final words of wisdom from our panelists, Michael has.
But we just want. I didn't have the book handy before, but Sarah, I want to recommend that maybe a young group, a study group, Anthony Flaccavento's book. It's I don't know if you can see it. They're building a healthy economy from the bottom up.
Yes.
And it has a subtitle somewhere. Harnessing real world experience for transformative change. I think this is the most extraordinary book for regenerating rural life that I'm aware of. And it requires fundamentally breaking with the economic system we have now. But Peter Morin always said, you plant seeds for the new society within the shell of the old. You don't attack it because they'll come and kill you. You know, they really will. And they're going to kill a lot more people real soon. So just ignore them and rebuild something big, something important from the ground up. And I have a hunch that's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Be the church
Gretchen,
in the world.
elderly.
Wonderful.
Michael has a surprise for us.
And just briefly before the surprise, since we're mentioning books, I do think it would be lacking if we didn't mention this book also, because we have Monica on the panel tonight. But Monica's book, Mountain Sisters, co-written with Helen Lewis, is such an amazing account of FOCIS and the early days of the beginnings of the Appalachian Studies movement and how it connects with CCA. This book blew my mind. So Monica, I'm grateful for the opportunity to say thank you for this book and to recommend it to everyone here. But from convent to community in Appalachia.
John Roush gave it to me.
So the surprise Eddie mentioned, hopefully you can hear the guitar a little bit, but if not, that's fine. We'll try to sing together over Zoom, which can be tricky because of the lag, but if not, just do your best. But we thought we couldn't end tonight without singing Happy Birthday to CCA. And we'll use the abbreviation in the song because it's really hard to fit Catholic Committee of Appalachia into the Happy Birthday song. So, thanks again to everybody for being with us tonight. This was such an amazing evening, and I teared up so many times just over the course of over 3 hours with you all. So God bless everybody, and thank you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, CCA. Happy birthday to you.
Hello, everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you. Goodbye.
You all. Thank you, sir.
Sarah.
Who's there?
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Marcus.
Where's Marcus? I haven't seen Marcus.
There he is. Hi, Marcus.
I totally recognized him.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. He's getting young like me, Marcus.
Take care.
Take care.
Good to see you both.